I'm Joe Halko, Director of Community Relations for Northwestern Counseling and Support Services, and welcome to another episode of NCSS Here for You. Since 1958, Northwestern Counseling and Support Services has been providing access to high-quality services which promote healthy living and emotional well-being to the residents of Franklin and Grand Isle counties. Over the years, as the needs of the community has changed, so too have the programs and services that we make available to assist children, adolescents, adults, families, and seniors. We take our role in the community seriously, and we strive to provide a continuum of the highest quality services to meet the needs of individuals at any point in their life. This month's episode is titled, The Relationship Between Chronic Absenteeism and Health. We've always associated student absenteeism with the lost opportunities for knowledge relative to academic performance. But did you know that it also influences social functioning, mental health, and even life expectancy? To discuss the relationship between chronic absenteeism and health in greater detail, I'm pleased to introduce this month's guest, Melissa Gaudio, NCSS school-based clinician who's located at MVU. Melissa, I'd like to welcome you to the program.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
And it's great to have you here and to talk about this, because I think viewers will have a much better understanding of just how broad this topic is. So let's begin with students across the country are missing school at alarming rates, and the U.S. Department of Education has branded this actually as a national crisis. So how prevalent is this situation?
Yeah, and I think as we collect more data, we're really starting to get a better idea. But it's about 1 in 7, which equates to 7 million students, miss about a month or more of school in an academic year. And subsequently, there's students who miss, we say 10%, but what that equates to is 2 days approximately a month when you break it down.
Sure.
And that's been proven to really negatively impact their academic performance. So we have this body of 7 million students who are missing a month plus, and then also this other group of students who are missing 10% of a school year, and that's being shown to negatively impact their performance.
Which I would guess, if we were to look at it historically, is probably, if not the highest rate, among the highest rates we've seen.
So I think that, and I think we'll get to it a little bit later as we kind of talk more about statistical reporting. As we're going and identifying it as a crisis, we're really starting to collect more data to support it. So we know, right, because of our implications of truancy officers and other resources that we've seen a need for in schools, that it's always been a problem. I think that as we're collecting more data based on other laws that have been in effect, we're really starting to see how much of a problem it really is. So I think it's twofold. I don't know exactly if it's more or if it's just more to our attention because of the more resources that we have available to us right now.
And speaking of laws and what have you, at the federal level in 2015, the Every Student Succeeds Act was launched. And can you explain what this addressed when this law came into being?
Yeah, and it addressed a lot of things, but specifically towards truancy and absenteeism. So this specific law built off of the No Child Left Behind Act that was already in existence. And it did a couple things for absenteeism and truancy. One is it gave the power to the states to create their accountability measures within their law, which one of them is absenteeism. It also requires all of the states to report that absentee data. So it kind of goes back to what we were talking about in the last question. And it also releases this body of federal funding for training and other resources to really make an impact towards the need of reducing chronic absenteeism.
And let's look at Vermont Law and school attendance and the responsibility of the caregiver.
Yeah, so we have the federal laws, and from the federal laws, it gives the states this ability to kind of create their law. And then from there, the schools create their policies and procedures to support this law. So in the state of Vermont, caregivers are really defined as the person that has control of the child, who is responsible for the child. And their responsibility is to get students ages 6 to 16 to school for the full number of days. It's 6 with few exceptions. So it's 6 to 16 or has completed the 10th grade. The school setting could be a public school. It could be an approved setting through the public school system or an approved homeschooling program. So there's some flexibilities of what that schooling looks like, but it states that the caregiver is responsible of getting the student to school that's between the age of 6 and 16 or the completion of 10th grade, the full amount of days in the academic school year.
And you had said with few exceptions. What type of exceptions would there be? That,
So one of them is the completing of 10th grade. So if a student completes 10th grade, that can be an exception where the caregiver is no longer held responsible. Physical and mental health diagnoses or challenges where it's required for the student's well-being to be out of school with pre-approval, but there's few others. So the law is pretty tight with some exceptions.
Now, let's look at, would you please explain the difference between truancy, absenteeism, and chronic absenteeism?
Yeah. And I think that it's really great we talk about this because we've spent so much time talking about truancy. And so truancy was really defined in that No Child Left Behind Act, that where it is giving the states the ability to really define it and for unexcused absences. So truancy is basically kids aren't coming to school and they're not excused. Whereas absenteeism really looks at absences that are either excused and or unexcused. It doesn't matter the reason, rhyme, or we are really looking at the number of days the student is not in their academic setting. And chronic absenteeism goes back to that figure we were talking about before, that missing 10% of an academic year. So on average, just 2 days a month will lead to it. So for a while, we've really focused on this truancy piece where they're unexcused, we're going to send someone out, we're going to get them to school. And now we're really trying to do a more holistic approach of focusing on absenteeism. Even if a parent is calling them out, right, that can be an excused absence. And if we're noticing a pattern or that they've been out a lot, you know, what can we do to really support that student and their family?
And what are the factors that make it challenging for our youth to access their education?
Yeah.
Which I know, you know, can lead to some of these other things we're talking about.
Yeah, and I think that's the challenge, right? Is we're finding that it's so different for all of our students and runs the gamut. So poor overall health for a student and or a caregiver. This idea of parentifying a student, maybe like their parent really has to go to work. They need to take care of a younger child, which means they leave school, and or an aging or ailing parent. You know, they need to be around for their parent. Transportation challenges. We live in a really rural community. If your student misses the bus and you don't have transportation, chances are that student's going to miss that day of school. Unstable housing, exposure to violence. English language learners as a second language proportionally miss more school. Students that switch schools in the middle of a school year. Bullying can all be factors. For unclean clothes have all been factors that have identified as why students might miss school.
And let's talk about what we know about the long-term health impacts that are associated with absenteeism.
Yeah, and I think to talk about that, it's also to kind of talk about this cycle of absenteeism. And so the National Survey of Children's Health identifies millions of students are diagnosed with a chronic health condition. And from there, we know that students that have a chronic health condition, misdiagnosed health challenges, undiagnosed health challenges, as well as, which we don't talk about as often as I think we should, poor or non-existent dental health, miss a disproportionately amount of school than their peers. So they tend to miss more school. And so from there, we also know that absenteeism in school leads to poorer health outcomes in adults. And from there, college graduates on average live 9 years longer than adults that didn't complete a high school program. Adults that have fewer years of completed education die prematurely and or are exposed to behaviors that might increase risk to illness and or injury. Work environments, unstable housing or housing challenges, as well as mental health challenges that lead to stress. And we know the correlation between stress and physical health. And all of these things pile up and increase poor health outcomes in later adulthood. And if we don't have access to health insurance that has benefits or to support our already existing health conditions or the illness and injury we face based on our housing or our workplaces, or access to programs that promote health and well-being, we're at greater risk of having negative health implications.
And it's very interesting, as you're talking about that, it reminds me, and we talk about trauma-informed care, we talk about ACEs, and I know that more now than ever before, as you said, we're getting more and more data that helps to support the fact that, realizing if children have been exposed to more than one or two different areas on the ACEs assessment and what have you, what that can or cannot mean long term. I guess what I'm saying is the fact that, as you had mentioned earlier, we're learning more and more now than ever before about how a lot of these things can correlate even from the child's youngest age. And then what that can mean from a standpoint of outcomes as they become adults and,
Absolutely.
Parents themselves. Because one of the things that I know we talk a lot about is that you may have a student that has been absent. You can work with that student, but if you put them back into an environment that is only going to, in essence, put them back to where they were instead of moving forward, it becomes a cycle that's sometimes very hard to break, I guess, is what I'm getting at. So let's look at how schools are becoming multidisciplinary hubs to help support students and their families.
I think it's really cool how schools are constantly growing and changing as we discover more needs in our communities are growing and changing. And I've really enjoyed the experience of getting to see that more being embedded in the school. I think students, our goal is for students to spend as much time during the school day in the school as possible. And we also know that students aren't available for learning if their basic needs aren't met. So if they're worried about being hungry or where they're going to sleep at night, it is really unrealistic for us to expect that they're going to be available for learning and that they're going to take the things that we learn. So it's knowing that we really have to create a therapeutic environment and a holistic approach in schools for kids to feel safe and supported and well-fed in order to get those other pieces that is ultimately the goal of education. And so schools have really started to experiment with other ways to get some of those services to students that may not be able to get them outside of the school building. So food is a great example. Breakfast, free and reduced meals. So if kids are fed, they're more available. If they're not worried about where that meal's coming from, they know they can go. A lot of our schools in this community and surrounding communities have summer programs. So even though the kids aren't physically in school, they're acknowledging that this is still a need and what can we do to really impact that. Mental health services are being embedded in schools. I think this is a great for NCSS has so many different school-based programs integrated in a lot of our local community schools and a wide variety of services that really help not just the student but the family, because it's not just a 6-year-old's responsibility to get out the door to school every day, right? We have this caregiver responsibility, and if we can't support both of them in a way, it really doesn't help the other out. So NCSS has a lot of really great programs that are really supporting the mental health of the student, case management for the family, and supporting the school in working with some students with some really significant needs and challenges. And I think that's fantastic. There's access to physical health resources within the school. There's diverse programming that schools are offering now. So we're talking about a lot of our statistics, right, are about how much education has an adult completed or have they completed their high school programming. So schools are offering more programs. We've had our tech programs, but diverse programming and or alternative settings to really support a student that may not be able to sit in a classroom for an hour plus. Yeah. To gain skills and ultimately graduate high school. And so something that's so, I don't want to say little because it's quite a big feat, but that we might not think about having such a great impact on our school and our accountabilities for success is really making a huge impact for a lot of students. And then substance use services. As well as schools just as a whole becoming this hub of social emotional learning and identifying that these are the things we need to work on and constantly growing and working to be better at that to really support all of our students and families. So I just think it's really cool to be able to see it all kind of come together and the amount of caring, compassionate people that we have that really just want to support a student and a family in whichever way they feel that they need to be supported. And it's cool that NCSS has such a cool role in it too, I think.
Yeah, and that's something I think that's very misunderstood in the community is that most people, when they see NCSS or the full name Northwestern Counseling and Support Services, aren't really correlating the fact of all the work that's being done through our integrated approach in schools as one example, because as you have cited, there are so many programs that we are involved in to assist the student and their families that I think unless somebody is immersed in that, they really don't have a good sense for how much work is really being done throughout the two-county area.
Yeah. And how supportive the schools are, right?
Yes,
and I think
in
that's
collaborating
important.
together. That's exactly right, because if they weren't, we wouldn't be there.
Yeah,
so,
and this whole multidisciplinary approach, as we're talking about hubs, like all of our community partners, right, are really so involved and invested. And I think just the relationships that are being built and the appreciation for one another, it has just been really incredible to see as someone that gets the privilege of working in a school. So
absolutely.
I think that's really cool.
It's the same thing like when we talk about NCSS being embedded in law enforcement. A lot of people would scratch their heads and go, what do you mean by that? But yet if people could see how hand in hand law enforcement and NCSS staff work together in a variety of situations, I think they'd be stunned.
Yeah.
Because, a lot of times they go out on a call and it's really more of a mental health call than it is, a domestic scenario or what have you, where the police don't need to be as involved. But without having that integrated approach, we'd never know that.
Yeah.
And I know years ago that is not the way it was, but it's really gratifying to see now that has changed dramatically. And it's the same thing in the schools.
Yeah.
So, we've talked about how NCSS has been and continues to be at the forefront of addressing chronic absenteeism locally. What advice do you have for parents in this whole arena?
And I think that's tough. And I think it's complicated. So I think the first thing is, creating a culture in your home that just values education and the importance and the expectation of going every day. We know stuff is going to happen. It's going to be hard some days, and students are going to miss for a variety of reasons. But if we can start by building a culture in our homes where it is expected that you go to school every day, that just kind of helps in the future, is if we can start it. So I think that's one thing. I think the other piece is schools are becoming more diligent on informing parents when students have missed. Not all parents may be aware that their students have missed. Some parents are very aware. We also don't realize necessarily how quickly absences add up, right? So the beginning of the school year, Johnny gets strep, he misses 2 days. The next month, there's a family event out of town, we have to leave on a Friday. We get to Thanksgiving, I can't get out of bed, I'm just gonna take the whole week off. And we're already at 5 days before the holiday break. And so we're already building to that 10% piece, because 2 days a month really isn't a lot in the grand scheme of things. And so using those letters and communications from the school as an opportunity instead of an I'm in trouble, just to kind of check, okay, we're at this part. Because we're looking for patterns. Is there something we can help you with? Is there things that you need help with that someone in our community might be able to help with to really promote going to school on a regular basis? And I think third fold is using the resources that are out there. So if you know that Johnny doesn't want to go to school today because he's really worried about something and we're starting to see a pattern, reach out to NCSS directly. Reach out to your school and your school supports to see what can we do to make it easier. What can we do to really support the student in being the most comfortable in school, as well as if you're just having a hard time getting them there, or whatever the reason may be, supporting the caregiver, right? Because at the end of the day, our law is stating that it's your responsibility to get a student there. And sometimes maybe you have to go to work and you can't get them on the bus. And that's important. And what can your community members do to help support getting you there? You know, I mean, we know from the work that we do that school refusal is probably one of the toughest things to really work with a student. I mean, can you imagine as a parent of a 15-year-old telling them they have to go to school? You know, there's only so much you can do, and acknowledging that this is tough. It's probably very stressful for you. There's probably implications beyond just the school piece, right? Your employer, your appointments, your other children, and how can we really recognize that and say, we hear you, let us help you. And I think we have the resources, we're growing the resources in both schools and our community partners, that we really can do that, and we really want to, we really do.
You know, and one thing, again, sometimes it gets lost in all this, is the fact that with all the support in that, it's really that we want people to be successful. It's not that you're trying to be, you know, in any way, shape, or form, pulling them in the, you know, off of a ship here. It's really, you want the person to be as successful as they can be. And again, everybody's different, every plan's individualized, but success at the end of the day looks different to people. But you want them to be successful so they feel good about themselves, their self-esteem, you know, as they go and grow. And I think, again, sometimes that gets lost in this, that you're a tyrant as opposed to, you know, somebody that is trying to be helpful.
Yeah, and I think in the long run too, you know, a big piece of why we're here today is talking about how education is an investment in long-term health. And so we get lost in the everyday sometimes, and sometimes it's really hard to get through to the everyday. But the long-term implications of working through this now really helps more positive health outcomes, you know, down the road and in the future. And again, as you said, that it looks different for everybody. What's good for one person and what their life goals are very different from somebody else. And taking the opportunity and to talk about all those reasons we talked about why someone might not be able to access education and what other barriers they are, and to really start supporting them in a way that they identify as helpful to them and their family, to really invest in that future, you know, kind of work towards it. And so I just think that that's a really important takeaway, is that education is very important. Education is also this long-term investment in future health and wellness. Yeah,
and sometimes it's not looked upon that way. I know. I know. So let me ask you, your time at MVU, what are you most proud of what you have seen in your time of working with the students at MVU? Is there anything that comes to mind that really makes you gratified about your time there?
Oh, I love being at MVU. So I don't know if there's anything that I would necessarily consider myself most proud of. To be honest, I've just really enjoyed really becoming part of the community. I feel like that is a privilege that people have let me become part of this community that I don't live in, right? So I'm just working in it. The relationships I've made with students and families have been incredible and challenging. And I think because it's been so challenging, that it has been the most rewarding, whether it's a positive relationship and or sometimes a negative relationship. And I think that our entire community has a really long way to go on building the importance of school and education. And although we have it, we really do, it's also that we have also had some really negative experiences, and those negative experiences sometimes take a really long time to come out of. And to really see what is actually being done and appreciate those things. And I'm really hoping that through my continued time at MVU, I can help really share that with not just their community, right, but this Vermont community of all the great things that they are doing, and the amount of care they really do have for each and every student that walks through those doors. And so I think that's been the coolest thing, as kind of being part of that community and making these connections and meeting these students and families, and them letting me do that, because I feel like that's a big privilege. Nobody has to let me work with them, and I always feel like that's probably the biggest testament of what I do is just being allowed to build those relationships.
And you touched on it, and you're so right, is the fact that it's really been an honor for NCSS to be involved with all of these schools and to assist. I know that in many instances, you become blended in with the staff at the school, and a lot of times people don't even realize that you're an NCSS staff member that is embedded in this location to assist them, and that's great. But the thing I think that people do need to realize, though, is the fact that it is a collaborative partnership effort, and that we're very thankful that the schools have agreed to work with us. But by the same token, I think what NCSS staff has been able to bring to the table has been incredibly valuable to a lot of students and their families over the years.
Absolutely.
And the other thing people don't realize is actually how long we've had staff embedded in the schools. Some of it goes back 20 years. So it isn't as if, this has just happened over the last year or so. But I just think that it's so important, the work that you and all of your peers do throughout the two-county area to help students and their families. And is there anything else you would like to share about the whole experience of working with students and families in the schools?
I think it's just been really great to be integrated into a school. So previously I did a lot more community work, and having a different perspective from being in a school has been so valuable to my everyday work. And I'm just really thankful to have that opportunity and to work around so many talented educators and staff and NCSS clinicians. So it's just been really cool, and I look forward to this work continuing. Again, NCSS is at the forefront of community partnerships and integrative care for health and absenteeism and truancy, and we have these supports, and I just look forward to watch it growing and hopefully to start going to other pieces of the state. We've had people reach out saying, oh, we don't do this yet here. Yeah. What is your advice? And getting everybody together to kind of start branching that out so it becomes an expectation in our state and not just our community.
Well, believe it or not, our time is up. I told you this would go quick,
It did. It goes
Melissa.
so fast.
So I do want to thank my guest, Melissa Gaudio, for sharing her insights on the relationship between chronic absenteeism and health. I also want to thank you, the viewer, for spending time with us again this month. You can learn more about all of the NCSS programs and services by visiting ncssinc.org. I'm Joe Halko, and I'll be back next month with another episode of NCSS Here for You.